It's hard to believe that it's been over 6 years since the release of Uncharted 4, Naughty Dog's first true effort on last-gen consoles. Uncharted 4 was one of the first PS4 titles to really put the 8th-gen visual package together, with excellent materials, baked GI, high-quality TAA, and superb modeling. Despite its age, the game and its 2017 follow-up, The Lost Legacy, still hold up quite well, particularly in remastered form running on PlayStation 5 in the Uncharted Legacy of Thieves Collection, which was released earlier this year. That compilation packed plenty of visual options, but arrived before the PS5's VRR firmware update. 8 months later, however, the game has now been patched with 2 bespoke VRR modes that promise to unlock the framerate, alongside a V-synced 40fps mode with 4K rendering. It's a bit of a Sony special, with all of the options that we've come to expect in first-party PS5 software now available. So how well do these last-gen titles pair with current-gen display technologies? Are these new modes the best way to enjoy the PS4 Uncharted titles? The Uncharted Legacy of Thieves Collection launched with a pretty reasonable group of visual modes. You had 30fps, 60fps, and 120fps modes, with the higher framerate options enabled by compromising on rendering resolution. These modes generally ran quite well, and featured some modest visual enhancements over last-gen consoles, but didn't quite take full advantage of modern displays. Patch 1.002 aims to solve that. First up is the 40fps mode, which is still dubbed Fidelity. This option replaces the 30fps fidelity mode when you boot the game with 120Hz output enabled on your PS5. Next is an unlocked version of the same mode, leveraging VRR to deliver a smooth experience with a variable framerate. Finally, there's an option to unlock the 1440p performance mode, delivering framerates north of 60fps, courtesy of VRR. So let's unravel these new options, starting with the 40fps fidelity mode. Visually speaking, this is a match for the old 30fps fidelity mode. Both render at a crisp native 4K resolution, with the same capable treatment of fine detail. Even in the most intense scenes, a straight 3840x2160 pixel count seems to be in play. Now, there isn't any form of load balancing like dynamic resolution, so we are essentially just tapping into the unused performance from the 30fps fidelity mode, and hoping there's at least 10fps of clearance once we raise the framerate cap. And at first glance, that's a little bit worrying. The Last of Us Part 1, which runs on a newer build of the same graphics engine, has a 40fps fidelity option that also renders native 4K, but that mode is frequently dragged down into the 30 to 40fps range, a victim of the aggressive render target. I was concerned that similar results could await us here, an inconsistent 40fps update that simply doesn't feel as good as it should. Thankfully, the results here are very solid. Generally speaking, this mode outputs at a consistent 40fps. Massive shootouts, driving sequences, and daring escapes. I spent hours stress testing this mode in its most challenging sections across both games, and it does hold up very well. 40fps splits the difference between 30fps and 60fps in terms of frame time, and it ends up feeling pretty smooth here. But it's not all perfect. In a few select sequences, I was able to trigger sub 40fps readings. The Madagascar combat and chase section was the most reliable culprit, with the busy market area causing brief dips, and the subsequent multi-vehicle pursuit throwing up less than ideal results in a few moments. At worst, we're looking at 35fps or so while fighting off chasing enemies, which seems like a byproduct of the heavy alpha here. Explosions and smoke right in front of the player viewport can cause issues elsewhere as well, but for the most part the drops in the 40fps fidelity mode are brief, rare, and aren't especially intrusive while playing. There is one exception, however. The Lost Legacy features a rainy fight with an APC a few hours into the game, which was a demanding encounter on PS4 Pro and causes extended framerate issues here as well. It is a little bit annoying, but it clears up once the enemies are defeated. There are also a couple of very minor issues worth noting. The Uncharted games hold a frame on each camera cut for TAA purposes, which presents as a subtle stutter when the viewport shifts. Also, the brief interstitial videos that sometimes bridge real-time cutscenes and gameplay play back at a straight 30fps. Overall though, the 40fps fidelity mode is almost a strict upgrade over the existing 30fps fidelity option, Animation is smoother, input response is snappier, and the visuals are identical. A handful of minor frame rate blemishes do crop up in very demanding moments, but outside of that, this is essentially a locked 40 FPS. Relative to The Last of Us Part 1's 40 FPS option, this is a far superior showing, with much more consistent performance. So the prospect of uncapping the frame rate fully is intriguing. Just how far can we push the PS5 at native 4K? By enabling the unlocked framerate toggle, we can do exactly that, and VRR should give us enough consistency to make it worthwhile. Unfortunately, I have to use off-screen footage to showcase VRR performance for technical reasons, and the developer implemented VRR modes with low framerate compensation can produce some odd readings at times using the TV's refresh rate readout. Essentially, you see a mix of LFC adjusted doubled framerate readings alongside intermittent flashes of 120 FPS. But if I pause the footage, you can get a better sense of the general performance level. For the most part, the Uncharted games seem to operate around 45 to 50 FPS on average in this mode. At worst, we do seem to get some readouts in the mid-30s, and at best we can hit 60 FPS. 60 FPS does seem to be a hard limit here, however, likely a byproduct of low framerate compensation. It does feel significantly smoother than the regular V-Synced fidelity mode, and actually seems reasonably close in general fluidity to the V-Sync performance mode, though at over twice the rendering resolution. And of course, any dips below 40 FPS are perfectly smoothed out and don't really register while playing. The same pattern holds true for the unlocked performance mode, but the frame rate uplift is much more profound. Under V-Sync, the performance mode was essentially already a locked 60 FPS, so here we're basically always above 60. The Uncharted games generally run at about 90 to 110 FPS here, which in practice feels silky smooth. More sedate scenes can reach a full 120 FPS, and very demanding sections can briefly dip into the 70s and 60s, but the average frame rate hovers around 100 FPS. That's not far from the 120 FPS refresh offered in the Performance Plus mode, and it ends up seeming quite similar in general play, but with substantially higher resolution and image quality. Relative to the V-Synced performance mode, this is a huge upgrade. In most console titles, unlocking the framerate doesn't give you this much of a boost, including in The Last of Us Part 1's unlocked framerate modes. But given the conservative fixed resolutions that the Legacy of Thieves Collection is targeting, combined with its PS4 era visuals, there's a transformative boost to framerate and animation fluidity when you let it run all out. So that's all the new modes covered. But there is another way to run the Legacy of Thieves Collection under VRR. Enabling VRR in the PS5 system settings and leaving the unlocked toggle off allows you to play these titles with capped frame rates, but with VRR enabled to smooth out any framerate hitches. The performance mode is essentially identical to its fully V-Synced counterpart if you just enable VRR. It didn't have issues before and it doesn't now. It's more or less a straight 60 FPS the whole way through. Fidelity mode is mildly more interesting under these parameters. The drops under 40 are smoothed out nicely, though it's otherwise the same as without VRR. In both cases, I would strongly prefer to play these modes with the unlocked toggle enabled instead. However, the Performance Plus mode doesn't support the VRR unlocked toggle, as the PS5 doesn't support refresh rates above 120 Hz. So simply enabling VRR in the Performance Plus mode makes a bit more sense here. As you might expect, any dips beneath 120 Hz, most obviously in the convoy chase sequence and APC fight, are smoothed out by VRR. This is a perfectly sensible option, and it's definitely preferable to the Performance Plus mode running under VSync. However, the Performance Unlocked mode also offers high frame rates, often in excess of 100 FPS, and comes paired with a 1440p resolution instead of 1080p. All things considered, it's a pretty substantial upgrade over the Performance Plus mode. Sony's approach to VRR support this generation has been a little bit curious. On the one hand, the PS5's VRR support came in late, has a limited refresh rate operating window, and lacks automatic low frame rate compensation. But on the other hand, Sony's first-party software usually takes great advantage of VRR, with excellent unlocked framerate modes and developer-implemented LFC. Across a wide variety of first-party PS5 titles, you get the typical 30 FPS and 60 FPS options, usually dubbed fidelity and performance, alongside a 40 FPS mode that comes online when you enable 120Hz in the console settings, all of which can run with VRR if you like. But Sony's games support an unlocked framerate toggle when operating with VRR, allowing the game to run without a framerate limit across multiple graphics configurations. And the Legacy of Thieves Collection throws in a full 120 FPS mode on top of all that as well. This is a daunting variety of options, but they're presented to the player in a sensible enough manner and take comprehensive advantage of modern displays in a way that we haven't really seen in other major console software. I would expect to see similar, if not identical, configuration options pop up in upcoming games like God of War Ragnarok, though perhaps the scheme will be simplified as games become more demanding. The Legacy of Thieves Collection fares particularly well with the unlocked modes, given the somewhat modest rendering resolutions that these games target relative to their age and visual complexity. We can properly max these games out now, and the results are impressive. I'm especially pleased with the Performance Unlocked mode, which pairs a reasonable 1440p resolution with smooth frame rates that average around 100 FPS. The new 40 FPS 4K option plays very nicely as well, of course, with stable performance despite rendering a full 4K pixel grid. So patch 1.002 is a great update to a capable conversion of the last two Uncharted experiences. All of the options you could conceivably ask for are here, and they all run better than expected. This is a perfect way to replay these games, or to experience the adventures for the first time. If you enjoyed this video, please like, subscribe, and press the bell for YouTube notifications. Check out the Patreon at digitalfoundry.net for exclusive and early access content. And to get in touch, just use Twitter. Thanks for watching.